I hacked all of his medical devices. I broke all sorts of U.S. federal laws, as it turns out, and without intending to, developed one of the first AIs for diabetes. And then we just gave it away. I did what I wanted to do. My son has never had a diabetes-related emergency, other than that very first one. And then I got to help millions of other families. The fact that it may be no money didn't matter at all. I did what I wanted to do in the world.
Welcome to the Humanity Code Conversations. I'm Heidi Lawrenson, and today we'll explore another perspective on intentionally shaping the future with AI, where our technology amplifies our shared humanity rather than diminishes it. It's not every day you get to have a self-described mad scientist as your guest, but today's just that day. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Vivienne Ming to the show. This professional mad scientist has been working with AI for more than 2 decades, and as you'll discover, she's extremely purposeful and human-centered in where she points her scientific mind and efforts. Vivienne is a theoretical neuroscientist, an entrepreneur with a PhD in computational neuroscience and psychology, an author, and a technologist. She even has built an AI tool to hack her son's diabetes. She's been featured in numerous top-tier publications, including The Atlantic, The Guardian, The Financial Times, and The New York Times, and frequently speaks about using AI-driven research to promote inclusion in business. Vivienne currently and concurrently holds a number of high-impact roles. She's the founder and CEO of Sokos Labs, her 5th company, which is an incubator exploring solutions to messy human problems so we can reach our full potential. She's the chair and chief scientist of the Human Trust, a nonprofit ecosystem of protected data and computing resources. And she's the chief scientist and board director of Dionysus Digital Health, which uses AI to help pregnant people proactively predict and prevent postpartum depression, which has a significant long-term benefit to parents, children, and ultimately society. The list goes on, but suffice it to say, Vivienne aims to make impact in everything she sets her mind to, which are all important issues focused on maximizing human potential at this point in time. So it's a privilege to have Vivienne here with us today. Ever since my first conversation with her, I've been so eager to have you hear her valuable perspectives for yourselves. She's doing the deep thinking and the deep research that I wish more leaders around the world did, or at least turn to as we're navigating this ultra-transformational time in human history. So Vivienne, welcome to the show.
It's lovely to be here. After that lead-in, I don't know what I can say or do that could ever live up to it, but I will pretend.
I know you better than that. So let's, to give people a sense of who you are a bit, you've been working with AI for decades, and most people don't even realize AI's been around that long, let alone since the 50s. So we'll get into some of the specific work you've done and the systems that you've built. But to help our audience get a good sense of who you are, let's begin with Sokos Labs, which, from my perspective, seems to be pulling a lot of your efforts and your care-abouts together. So what are some of the messy human problems you're addressing, and why? And, why can AI help solve them better than humans alone?
The funny thing about my career, despite you having listed so many different organizations and projects, is, to me, I'm just working on one problem. And it's the problem that got my attention as an undergrad and then in grad school and has continued through, which is how do we build better people? And I wish, 1, that had some easy answers. And 2, I hope people understand the somewhat intentional provocation of using words like build. I just like to embrace the idea that there is some messy parts of this. And whatever I might think of myself, I actually encourage people to be skeptical and don't just assume someone like me is going to solve grand problems of the world, but really hold us to account. So I don't shy away from the fact that when I went to grad school, I told the people I was interviewing with that I wanted to build cyborgs, which generally
How'd that
speaking,
go over?
yeah, well, here's the interesting thing. If I said it to my fellow prospective grad students, they would literally scoot away from me for fear that my crazy would rub off and none of us would get in. But actually, within the field of neuroscience, there's the subfield of neuroprosthetics, which existed even 30 years ago. And frankly, exists even before then. Some of us probably know people that have a cochlear implant, which is essentially a hearing aid that literally wires into your brain and restores hearing to people that have peripheral hearing loss. But what if we could do that for people that are paralyzed? What if we could do that with people that had strokes or have cognitive deficits caused by brain damage? You know, that's my area of interest, is cognition and emotion and all of these spaces. So when I launch a new company in education or in workforce, when I start a new book that, hey, this one over here is about the value of valuing people that are different from us, and this one over here is about AI and the future of work. All of these to me are the exact same problem. How do we make certain everybody has the best life possible by building neighbors that will help them find that best life? And so at Sokos Labs, after doing this as an academic for many years and then starting a bunch of companies, I realized what I loved about all of this stuff was certainly not writing grants as a faculty member or pitching venture capitalists. I mean, my dirty secret is I trick VCs into funding my experiments. And it turns out as long as you pay them back, they never catch on. All you have to do is
That's a book in and
make
of
them
itself.
enough money that they're happy to keep funding the experiments. But what I loved was solving the problems. And some things entered my life that really, really pointed this out to me. Two of them was something you already mentioned. My son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and I admired his endocrinologist and the people that were working on him. And yet I was just stunned at how, at this point, 14 years ago, how diabetes was being treated. So I hacked all of his medical devices. I broke all sorts of U.S. federal laws, as it turns out, and without intending to, developed one of the first AIs for diabetes. And then we just gave it away. I did what I wanted to do. My son has never had a diabetes-related emergency, other than that very first one. And then I got to help millions of other families. The fact that it made me no money didn't matter at all. I did what I wanted to do in the world. And then when I was launching my very first startup in education, AI in education, back when nobody outside of nerds like me knew what AI was, this would be 2007, 2008. There's no Coursera. There's no Khan Academy. Nobody wanted to fund what we were doing. And the UN and Ericsson came along and said, we heard about what you're working on. Would you contribute to this philanthropic project to reunite orphan refugees with their extended family members? And those are maybe the two projects in my whole life I am most proud of, even their imperfections. And maybe not even though they were both philanthropic, but part of it was I knew they were important to me because I worked on them anyways. So, long answer, come to a punchline. I started Sokos Labs out of an early organization, Sokos Learning, with the idea of what if we just ran a lab that helped people? People could bring me challenging problems, and as long as it's about people, and I think we can make a unique contribution. There are billions of dollars and a million geniuses working in cancer research. My one additional bit of work there is not necessarily going to help. But when I get a message, Dr. Ming, my daughter has 500 seizures a day. Please save her life. Or, Dr. Ming, our country does everything the World Bank tells us. Our PISA education test scores go up every year, and still nobody hires our citizens. help us figure out what's wrong with our education system. And everything in between those two extremes. If I think I can do something unique, I pay for everything, and whatever we invent, we give away. And it's the best job in the entire world. It can be an expensive job sometimes, but my life has been good to me. And so I have this opportunity to do this. And every now and then a project we work on, like in 2019, I started this project looking at how genetics and epigenetics and hormones and everything that make us up relate to suicide risk. Over subsequent years, we identified the first ever epigenetic, in fact, the first ever biological marker for postpartum depression. And, that became a startup, Dionysus Health, because we couldn't give those tests away for free philanthropically, but developing them, going through the FDA process, the whole thing, that's better done by a company. And so some of my companies are born right out of these philanthropic projects. Others, we just give away whatever we come up with. And others have turned into this new venture, which is the human trust, where we can not only invent them and prove that they work and then give them to diabetes companies or give them to the UN, we can actually give them directly to people. And so a lot of the things I've had the chance to invent over the years are going to be free inside the trust. But as you know, and I'm sure we're going to talk about, the trust has a lot more going on inside it than just that.
Absolutely. I'd love to get into that in a little bit. Just hearing you, though, and all that you just talked about and, kind of a really unique business model, not a business model you really hear about.
The worst startup idea of all time. Endless demand, zero revenue.
Transforming business models and economics as you go. But you single-handedly seem to do more in a day than some large companies, it seems, to advance AI's benefit on humanity. And, you talked about, underlying, you do it to build better people, but what drives you? I've heard you talk about a sense of purpose, and you've studied purpose. Actually, I think you've written about purpose. And I ask because I wonder if there's some lessons to us generally being more purposeful with AI.
I mean, with AI and with all sorts of things, the amazing part of the story about purpose, the science of it, frankly, the economics of it is, well, let's start with the psychological construct. We can have all sorts of ideas of what purpose is, but I'm a nerd. I like hard numbers. What is purpose? You have something in your life that's bigger than you, something that would take more than a lifetime to complete. In that sense, there's a lot of things we might do that are good for us or those around us, but might not qualify in this definition of a purpose. I want a really good career. I want to win a gold medal in the Olympics. Maybe doesn't define. I think the classic sort of metaphor here, allegory, is the world gets better when old men plant trees. They will never rest under the shade of that tree themselves, but they do it anyways. And that's really is the story of purpose, because if you're a nerd and you collect data about massive numbers of people, or you have the chance, as I have done, to collaborate with a giant multinational company that has an interesting question, what's the single biggest untracked predictor of productivity inside our 430,000 person company? And I get to measure everything, and I get to track everyone's interactions and do some really cool math that I won't drive people insane with describing here, but for the nerds in the audience, mashing up back propagation for credit assignment with a real human network instead of a neural network, and value-added modeling, and finding that the thing that drives the global outcomes for this company was actually people who, for no apparent reason, just helped the people around them. That's what we saw in their behavioral data. People that made sacrifices, small sacrifices. They weren't laying down their lives for their coworkers, but the ones that just helped, even though they had nothing to do with the project, that went almost entirely untracked within the company, and yet drove a huge amount of success and productivity. And then we look at the behavioral correlate of that from traditional psychological tests. Single biggest correlate by far is strength of purpose. The more you have something in your life that's bigger than you, more than a lifetime to complete, the more likely you are to make these sacrifices. And here's where you get at the paradox of purpose. Because in a classic liberal economic sense, well, that's good for everybody else, but it must be bad for you. You know, we're all supposed to be rationally self-interested. But here is this really cool finding. People who score highly in construct purpose and life meaningfulness, they earn more money. They accumulate more wealth in their lifetime. They have more friends. They go further in their education. They're happier. They have lower central body mass, lower all-cause mortality. I mean, pick anything you'd want to be true about you when you're 65. People who are richer in purpose, it's more likely to be true of them across dozens of life outcome variables. So if I needed to argue as to why people should lead purposeful lives, there's the argument, but also the paradox. If you did it for those reasons, then it really wouldn't qualify as a purpose, right? It's a bit of a trap. So instead, when I get, approached maybe after I give a talk and college student or even a young person in their career, and occasionally even older people come up to me and say, Dr. Ming, it's wonderful that you've found a sense of purpose in your life, noting purpose. It could be a very spiritual thing for some people. It could be a very humanist thing. Nothing about the definition ties down what it is you're invested in, only that you're willing to make sacrifices for it. And so that's what I say to them is first off, you don't need to find a purpose. It's a construct. Frankly, it could probably be anything if you were willing to make those sacrifices for. So ask yourself, what are you willing to make? What would you do if no one ever knew that you did it? So why do I run Sokos Labs, which only costs me money? And yeah, it's a wonderful ego rub, and I get to share wonderful stories with people. I do it because earlier in my life, I fell on hard times. I wouldn't wish homelessness on my worst enemy because I've been there. And I got not just a second chance, I got an umpteenth chance to do my life again until it finally stuck. And I found in that a purpose. I found in that the understanding life isn't about me. Life is about whether I can make other people's lives better. Whether that's your purpose doesn't matter. And that's perfectly fine as it is. And I don't need agreement. I just need that way to make choices in my life. And I thought, if I really believe my own research and the experience of my own life, why don't I go all in? And I'll start this lab, and all it will do is give, on the assumption that if I work on the things I care enough about, that I'd be willing to pay for them myself, that in the grand scheme of things, it would come back to me. And again, I'm not a spiritual person. I'm a very grounded, real world. This is what we've got. So I'm not expecting this to happen just because there's some justice to the universe. For me, the meaning is what we make of it. This is the meaning I want to create with my life.
My experience, I can resonate with a lot of what you're saying. Just in the last couple of years, my experience is that purpose found me. And what I'm doing right now, this conversation that we're having, the Humanity Code, it chose me somehow and it fuels me and I just can't not do it. And so, yeah, everything that you were saying just really resonates, and it is a beautiful, energizing
Well,
saying.
the flip side is I had this friend, she's a psychologist and education researcher, professor at UC Berkeley, and at various points during the day, she would finish in her office, which is at one end of this very large building, and her lab was at the other end. And as soon as she was done in the office, she'd run down the hallway a grown-ass woman would run down the hallway. And one day I asked her, what, you're running, you're a junior, an associate professor. You're running past all these people that are going to vote on your tenure, and you look like a loon. Why? What is so important? No offense, but as valuable as it is, there's nothing about an education research experiment that demands someone run down the hallway. And she looked at me in genuine confusion and said, but I was done in my office and I wanted to be working on my experiment, and walking is a waste of time. And to be a little blunt about it, for people that are thinking about, joining academia, becoming scientists themselves, or frankly, any field like this, that's your competition. Someone for whom the work itself is the reward. And whatever certain notable political figures might want to portray about academia, it is a deeply competitive field. If you want to work hard and make money, go do it on Wall Street. If you don't love science, or if in your heart you're not ready to make a sacrifice for it, which you wouldn't feel like a sacrifice at all, then maybe there is something else you want to do. And it's worth finding that thing.
It kind of takes me to the next area I'd love to talk to you about, because it's something that I immediately discovered we had a vision match on. It just runs sort of anathema to what you've been talking about of, just really being very, very purposeful and leveraging, our fullest potential. So most people, most media coverage focuses on, first of all, the role of AI in work, but especially the ability to create efficiency, drive new revenue streams, et cetera. And I remember being at a panel with some, very high-powered leaders in technology and product, and they described AI as being all about efficiency. And yes, it puts everything on steroids, but that's, in my view, not the end game. So I remember you said, AI should make us better humans, not just more efficient. And we're kind of blinded by this focus because we've been conditioned to the value of efficiency, and, the systems that we live in are leading us to that. So where does this ultra focus on efficiency take us? Let's take it to the extreme. We put it on AI and the steroids, and what would good look like?
First off, in defense of efficiency, the title of my dissertation is just 3 words. And the first one is efficient. Efficient auditory coding. I do believe, in the grand scheme of things, simply as a function of math, if you think of the inefficiency, not valuing the people around you as highly as they deserve. If you think about the inefficiency of making an entrepreneur file 57 pieces of paperwork for something that should be a button press on a website, whatever we want to define it as, believe me, I'm right there with you. There's all sorts of inefficiencies in the world, which range from the annoying to the regressive to the suicidal. And we should really think hard about that. But we should also understand, what do you mean when you mean efficiency?
Yeah, the definition.
AI can do 2 things astonishingly well. It can do all sorts of things astonishingly well, as we've seen in the news repeatedly and my own research has shown. But I want to look at it from a really broader range of a choice we have in front of us. It could do 2 things for us astonishingly well. It can give us exactly what we want in the moment that we want it, or it could only ever give us what we need, and only when that need was at its greatest. And, the reality of what we should be aiming for might be somewhere in between. But in the first case, I think of, I won't name the company, but I was speaking at an internal event in a large company, and they had their own internal large language model that they had just signed a huge contract for. They were training their leadership on how to use it. And they gave their 10 best use cases. Number 1 was have it read and summarize your email for you. Save 50% of your email time. Number 2 use case, have it write your emails for you. Save 50% of your email writing time. That's insane. First off, never in a million years would I let any of these things write a single sentence for me. And we can talk about why. Not because they can't write a decent sentence, they can write a great sentence. But we should really understand why I wouldn't do that, and I don't. But also, boy, it sure seems like what you actually just said is instead of a multi-million-dollar contract for an AI, stop writing long, boring emails. Wouldn't that do the exact same job? What is this? This kind of a hyper focus on hyper efficiency. We're writing all these terrible emails and it's sucking up all of our time. So let an AI do that for us? Insanity. That is literally a scene out of the movie Brazil, where he's got these pneumatic tubes with an inbox and an outbox, and he just jams them in together, and then the whole system explodes. Which, by the way, I guarantee you, someone's got rigged up an LLM that's reading their emails and writing responses already. And a paper just came out in Nature last week showing that if the AIs start training on their own output, the system falls apart. All of it stops working. It doesn't truly speak the way we speak, in complicated but crucially important ways. So if I believe in efficiency as a broad truth of the universe, but think it is insanity to look at the value add of a system that can diagnose cancer, that can help someone who could never afford an elite lawyer understand a contract. And you look at what AI can do, predict postpartum depression risk, treat Alzheimer's. That's another of my companies. You reunite orphan refugees with their extended family members. Are we satisfied with using it to reduce the amount of time we spend reading and writing emails? But that's just the first part. This is why this over-focus on transient efficiency, the boring parts of how we waste our days. AI, go experience that boring for me. I can't be bothered. As opposed to, here's how I use AI, just to make a contrast against having it read emails. As I already said, I would never let it write anything for me. Why? Because in a world in which AI knows all the answers, and on some level it does. It can pass medical licensing board exams. It can review contracts better than the average lawyer can. It can do all of this, what I'm going to call well-posed problems. It can produce the answers to those better than most of us. And it can do it for all of those problem spaces. No experts needed. Where it falls down is, okay, but what should I do with those answers? Where do I go from here? So I write. I have a book that I'm finishing this August, and I'm incredibly excited about it. And I experimented with having it try to help me write by pre-writing a couple of pieces. It was just terrible. So banal. It read like it was written by the better half of the internet. But generic and banal, incredibly well punctuated,
yeah, so obvious.
Even nicely structured, persuasive, yes. But even though I gave it my own writing and I told it, write like me, and I could see that it captured elements, it wasn't like me. It didn't add the jokes that I would have added. It didn't have the insights that I would have offered in. So instead, here's how I use it. I have a long-standing relationship with Google. I don't think they're a perfect company, but I've always respected that. So I use Gemini a lot, which is their version of an LMM, a large multimodal model. Gemini, you are my worst enemy, my career-long nemesis. You have found every flaw in every paper I ever published. You've dogged me for as long as I have been working. Here is the next chapter for my new book. Find every flaw and explain to me in detail why I'm wrong. Or Gemini, you are the audience for an upcoming talk, but you're bored and a little hungover, and you didn't actually come for my talk. You came for the musical act that was going to be later. Here is a rough script for my talk. Tell me where people are going to yawn and what of my existing stories might actually connect with them better. Rather than focusing on the efficiency of how quickly can I write my book, I have instead actually made it harder to write my book. I have slowed myself down, but I've done it productively. So I kind of see this as another kind of efficiency. How do I get at the best book I could possibly write without having to go ask 1,000 different people to edit it? I have this amazing tool, and it can give me this feedback. It's still my core voice. And let me tell you, again, in a world in which we have all the world's knowledge in our pocket, not just the raw search of Google or Bing, but Gemini and Claude and GPT that can answer almost any question, even if you're never certain if your answer is right. It's the fun part of them.
At this point.
But they're all there. What's left for me? What's left for us? And here's what's amazing. If it can answer all of those well-posed questions better than we can, then clearly that's not where my value is, or our value.
Right.
Our value is with ill-posed questions, questions that have no right answers. In fact, the biggest, most important questions in the world are all ill-posed. It's exploring the unknown and dealing with uncertainty. My examples would be every project I've ever worked on. Never in my entire career, from the first research program I started as an undergrad to an analysis I am working on right now on perimenopause, never forget the right answers and all the perfect data. I've never even been given the right questions. Not on a single one. How do you reunite orphan refugees with their extended family members? How can AI help my son to never end up in an emergency room because of his diabetes? How do I build a system that can figure out not only when someone is at risk of suicide, but how you could help them? None of those come with questions, answers, anything. You are exploring the unknown. And what's amazing about that, if I may put it in a positive light, is what we already know, what AI is great at, that's bounded. What we know is enormous. Humanity has worked hard for that knowledge, but it's finite. What is unknown is infinite. So yes, I get it. It's scary living in a world when it feels like AI might just get better at us than everything. But what's amazing is there is an infinite space left for us to explore, that for the foreseeable future, we will be not just better at, but uniquely able to explore. AI is a great tool. I use it all the time, or I wouldn't have spent the last 25 years of my life the way I do. But it's just a tool, an astonishing and unique tool, maybe one of the most powerful ever invented by humanity. But we will never tap that potential if we simply say, give me what I want when I want it, and let me just lounge around the rest of the time. Instead, we say, I want to be better, and AI's role is to challenge me to be better, not simply to make it easier.
It's interesting as I hear you talk, it's almost like a symbiotic relationship of challenging ourselves with AI will help us reach our potential better. And it will also, allow us to leverage AI to its full potential and not just think about it as, writing silly emails for us.
I think it leads to something I frequently say, which is often a little shocking to people because it's not how most people think about technology. Technology is the great leveler, and most of the early research on large language models shows that it actually helps early career, less experienced workers more than experienced workers. But that is a very complicated story that needs so much more unpacking. My general truth, which holds as much for LLMs as anything else, is that technology is invariably inequality increasing. Not because technology is bad, not because this is inevitable, but because the people best able to make use of it are the ones that actually need it the least. And that's a reality that is playing out right now with how AI is being adopted. Is a lot of what people are focusing on with efficiency. How do we build the products that make life easier and easier and easier? Is, interestingly, I will open the curtain and let you see behind the scenes, the very people building those products to make life easier, that's not how they're using them. These are people who, much like me, are actually using it to really challenge themselves. But it's a funny thing. The techno-utopianists on one side and the dystopianists on the other share one thing truly deeply in common. They both have a profound disdain for humanity. And I know that sounds harsh, and many of them would probably say, of course I don't. But what is at heart they share is a belief that we can't be trusted with it. The dystopianists think nobody can be trusted with it, and the utopianists think you can only trust me, the elite. Only I will do the right thing.
That is a perfect segue to something I'd like to explore a little more deeply with you. In a lot of your writing, you use words that we as a society, and not just here in the U.S., are contemplating deeply at the moment, and they're government-related type of terms. Words like democracy. You say, AI needs democracy, not democratization. You've used the word constitution, saying AI needs one, not a manifesto. That was in the Financial Times. You use the phrase civil rights, and, saying that AI, kind of as you were just alluding to, is simply incompatible with that. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by all of that, and what are some of the steps that are being taken or that you would like to see being taken that would, help us, give you the most hope that it's going in the most beneficial direction?
Yeah. It's interesting because I think a lot of my thinking about AI, if I get introduced onto stage or in a blurb about an op-ed I'm writing as an AI expert, I use AI as a tool. My actual research is about brains and people. It just so happens my field just happened to be, by dumb luck, at the forefront of bringing AI out in the world and trying to understand how brains process information. Quite genuinely, we end up with deep neural networks, which was the start of this recent revolution. But at its heart, when you really want to understand what's possible with machine learning and artificial intelligence, much less of the question is about what AI can do. And much more of the question is, what will we do with it? And it's a question that's complicated because we're all very different and we'll use it in different ways. So that leads to complicated issues like this idea. I think I didn't make a friend when the head of Mozilla got up on stage and said, we need to democratize AI. And I get it. And I love Mozilla, the nonprofit that puts out Firefox and freed up our browser space from the tyranny of Microsoft decades ago. I love that spirit. I loved the spirit when people talked about social networks, democratizing the world and supporting this sort of liberal democratic initiative. But boy, did it not turn out that way. It turns out there's a big difference between how people actually use social networks than our idealized world. Turns out there's a big difference between what people will actually do with AI. I'm not picking on the companies building this stuff. Let's be clear. Facebook is the way it is because we all chose to use Facebook. We could have chosen to use a different product, one that better supported a better world. We could have chosen, we would say, no, I don't want AI reading my emails and writing it. I actually really cherish crafting a message to the people I care about. But that's not the choice we're making. And maybe some people are, but maybe not all of us. And products get developed where the demand is. But, the circular nature of real causality in the world is, of course, also that's because those are easier products. Those are easier to sell. It's easier to tell people, imagine all the free time you get back, instead of making them think hard about, don't you want to be a better person? Yeah, the brunt reality is, all of my flowery language aside, the AI that speeds up your emails is a killer product that will be hard to displace. And it's already there in most people's emails today. I never use it, but it's there. So part of this is on us. When I talk about, getting to the issues of political influence, I get asked to talk about to brief political leaders and policymakers on issues of disinformation and misinformation online. There's absolutely a role for AI in improving that. A great paper showed that a simple little intervention, if a piece of social media came through to your feed and you click share and it's from an unreliable source, this simple little reminder pops up and says, hey, did you really think about how reliable this source is? And it turns out it dramatically reduces resharing of mis and disinformation, particularly among older adults. So we should be excited. AI is kind of potentially created a little bit of a problem. It's helped to solve it. But actually, AI didn't really create that problem. The vast majority of mis and disinformation isn't AI created, and probably won't be for a very long time. You think, I'm so scared because I live in a world in which a photorealistic image of the Pope in a puffer jacket can be created. But actually, an obviously false and made up tweet. Riots in England last night because of a false story about who this terrible person who went and knifed a bunch of kids was. We don't know anything. The British police haven't released any information about who it is, so we don't know. But based on completely made up nonsense shared on social media, these far-right protesters went out and rioted in the streets and injured people. They wanted to be lied to. They wanted an excuse to do what they're doing. Bluntly, I wish I could say my grandparents or even my parents were still around to want to do these things, but my mom, for as wonderful a person as she was, became a Fox News quoting machine later in her life. And I will be honest, I think she knew that a lot of what she was hearing was spin on the heart of the stories, but she wanted that spin to be true. She wanted it to fit the world she wished she lived in. AI isn't making disinformation. And the flip side is, while it can help, why aren't we already asking ourselves, do I believe this story? Why did I need a reminder to pop up? Why am I not already thinking the most important thing to be skeptical of isn't the government? It isn't fringe groups. The most important thing to be productively skeptical of is myself. That's the only path to being better.
Putting your neuroscientist hat on, or, whatever hat would answer this question. What is it? Why is it that we humans, really kind of miss the assignment facing us right now? Why is it that we don't recognize that, much of what is at stake right now with our future is related to us as who we are as people versus the technology itself?
Sure. And I should be clear, although I think anyone watching this can understand that I have a political perspective myself, and it's definitely much more to the left. Not in all things. I'm a believer in markets. I'm a believer in some of what it was written into J.D. Vance's book, which is we really need to take more responsibility for our own choices. And that is a hard truth for people to come to. And it's a truth that's sometimes shied away from on the left, because it is also true that there are systematic biases in the world. They're both true at the same time. I wish the world had simple answers, but if you've got anyone, this is the simplest thing in the world. If anyone ever promises you one simple solution to something, the one thing you can be certain of is that they're wrong. There are only ever messy human problems. They only ever have messy human solutions. If you can't get comfortable with that, you can't actually make the world a better place. Having said all of that, we launched a research project during lockdown into what we call the neuroscience of trust. What happens if I meet two strangers? One is very similar to me and one is very different. And it turns out inside our brains, medial prefrontal, supraorbital, your amygdala and your anterior cingulate and all of these circuits within your brain that are particularly related to some issues about how we process emotions and how we process relationships with others, and fear and trust, and also how we process rewards, dopamine, endogenous opioids, the things that teach us to do the same thing again the next time. And again, our brains respond wildly differently to those two strangers. The person who's very similar to you, you get free dopaminergic rewards for trusting them. You get free endogenous opioids. A lot of that trust is what we as a neuroscience would call automatized. It's not effortful. You don't see a whole bunch of frontal activity being recruited to sort of effortfully trust a stranger. On the other hand, you see all of that. None of the free rewards. You only get a reward for trusting a stranger in an out group, to borrow language from psychology, when that trust pays off, as opposed to the in-group stranger where you get the reward right up front. In other words, we see something much like this in another area of neuroscience. When we watch rats solve mazes, put a rat in front of a maze it's never solved before, you see no rewards up front. You see lots of activity as it's wandering around this maze and thinking and thinking and thinking. Finally, at the very end, there's cheese and there's a big reward. You put a rat in front of a maze, it's solved many, many times. And you see the rewards of finding the cheese literally the moment it recognizes the maze. And then, bip, 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 no errors, right to the cheese. And it's fascinating. So part of what's going on here is both the people that are parts of our in-groups. And we're all very different. Some of us have very large in-groups. Some of us have very narrow in-groups. Doesn't make us good or bad people per se. We're just different in that way. But everybody has some degree of in-group and out-group. And the way those rewards play out across that divide, we have different stories we tell ourselves, schemas, narratives about the world. If a given news story or social media fits that, it's like a stranger from our in-group. If a news story doesn't fit it, it's an out-group. I'm only going to believe that story if I put the effort in. But I'll believe this one for free. I'm already getting the rewards for believing it. Now, it turns out when we're our best selves and in the quiet of our minds, when we're really reflecting, we can trust across those divides. We can be that better version of ourselves, but it's effortful. And it draws on the same cognitive neurological resources that we need for our lives. So as soon as you have stakes, as soon as there's social stress and cognitive load and emotional load, now the very prefrontal resources you're using to deal with solving the problem itself are the ones you would have used to share trust across that divide. And maybe the most fascinating part of the whole story is you don't feel like a different person. You don't feel changed, but your choices suddenly dramatically changed. A tweet you wouldn't have reshared before Now you do. And let's call it a job candidate you would have said was entirely qualified. Now they don't look as qualified. And then we build very complicated stories afterwards about why that was the right decision to make. And unfortunately, those stories can become reinforcing. I think the best part of the whole story, though, is it is possible to break those cycles and genuinely train your brain to have bigger in-groups, more inclusive. But it's effortful. It's probably maybe the through point of my whole conversation with you is all of these opportunities are there, but they are effortful. I wish I could peddle some quick solutions, but the best intervention when it comes to reaching across divides has a very wonky terminology. It's called counter-stereotypical exemplars. But if you kind of unpack the fancy words, you need to spend time with people that violate your stereotypes. It is far and away the most effective way to reduce bias in both directions across every divide. But it needs to be productive. These need to be positive, productive interactions. And again, some of us just, without a little extra support, it just feels so hard to make that effort to reach across that divide and have that conversation.
That definitely explains a lot and explains where we need to step up and step in. I want to touch upon what we said we would earlier a little bit more, and that's the human trust and data trust. We were talking about another kind of approach to trust just a little bit ago, but so this is switching gears a little bit, but you've said businesses and capital markets have conflated the value of data and the value of AI. And I'd love to hear what you mean by that, and what are the role of data trust like the human trust?
Yeah, I mean, you brought up some of my other ideas from recent op-eds and other writing I've done over the years, which is, again, another big messy story, one that touches on civil rights. But it also touches on innovation and economic growth. At its heart is what you just alluded to. We have reached this space, not even just with companies, but even in comparing AI policy in the US versus the EU versus China, is this idea of, oh my goodness, if we don't allow as much data as possible to flow to companies, China will win, or because the EU has these restrictive laws, its economy will fall apart. Well, you have fundamentally conflated these two ideas, which is ownership of data and the value of products developed around AI, built using that data. And so nowadays, if you're a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, or probably anywhere in the world, part of what you're asking your startups, your notionally AI-driven startups, is, do you have a unique plan to create a data set that no one else has so that no one else can compete with you? Which is insane. I said I believe in markets. Markets work when there's actual competition. If we could take data ownership off the table, then we would see an explosion of AI innovation and economic growth. But here's the interesting thing. I don't mean in the way some of these advocates do, which is just give all your data away. You have no rights over it. How about the exact opposite? What if we said everybody owns the data coming out of their own body, and we can choose to share that data if we are given the confidence that it won't be abused? I don't have to make a choice between a life-saving medical test and the right to the privacy of the data coming out of my own body. That should not be the choice. If we could take that tension away, then on one side, economic growth and innovation. But on the other side is the question of civil rights. So in this op-ed you alluded to a couple of times, I wrote about how AI, as it is being used today, is simply incompatible with any modern notion of civil rights. Because who gets a job? Who gets a loan? who gets admitted to university, the medical diagnoses, legal judgments are being made in 50 milliseconds in a server farm in Northern Virginia. And by the way, you didn't even apply for that job or that loan, so you had no idea that you got passed over. Now, we could talk about the ways in which AI is imperfect. And by the way, it is fundamentally imperfect. So are we. To me, that's not a deal breaker. But let's imagine a world in which it is perfect. But it is only perfect in service of the company that has developed it. So the banks want to maximize the returns on their investments. The companies probably have assumptions about who their best employees will be, and the universities as well. We know very well that a lot of diagnostic work in medical AI has been developed around reference populations that just don't generalize to everybody. If I want a genuine second opinion, I need to be able to get a truly different AI to give it to me. So my contention is that we need a constitutional amendment in the United States and the equivalent around the world that says, just as I have a right to a lawyer or a doctor acting solely in my best interest, I should similarly have the right to AI acting solely on my behalf. Not because Jeff Bezos is a bad guy or because I can't trust the CEO of OpenAI. Inevitably, I blank on his name over and over again.
Sam Altman.
Believe me, I do not trust him. Again, not even because he's a bad guy, because what's in their interest is not always going to be in ours. And that's fine. But we all need some mechanism by which we can defend our own right to our own privacy, where we can get all this amazing AI without giving everything else away in exchange. So we started the Human Trust as a data trust. This is a nonprofit, and to make it really grounded, I started it as a partner organization to Dionysus Health, the one doing the work, the first ever biological test for postpartum depression, because I made a promise in an essay I wrote years ago. The next time I started a startup, my startup wouldn't own the data. We would start a data trust, and the data trust would own the data. So that's what we've built here. The data trust owns the data, and its sole fiduciary responsibility is to the moms from whose body that data came. It owes Dionysus nothing. It is entirely independent, though I sit on the boards of both. There are a group of independent trustees who outvote me, and their sole responsibility is to say, whatever we're going to do with this data, serve the human development of our members. Is it helping with health, with education, human capital development? Is it in their interest? And I actually believe, in the spirit of I believe in markets, there should be many data trusts out there, all offering different ways for people to collectivize their data together and create value. But what's exciting with what we're doing is we already have brought other groups in, some academic, some nonprofit, some for-profit. We're all under the same deal. You don't get to own the data, but you get to benefit from it. And when someone else adds more benefit into the system, say Dionysus is doing an epigenetic test and we add into the data for this person some insights about their epigenetics, that can be leveraged by researchers trying to explore cancer risk. That can be leveraged by one of our new partners that's looking at perimenopause and perimenopausal depression. Everybody benefits from everyone else's discoveries. And the ultimate question is, for those members of our greater coalition that are for profit, is, do you have the best product? And you can't build monopolies around data moats where you have a unique data set that no one else gets to touch, and people are forced to interact with you because no one else can do what you can do. So this is big and audacious. This isn't boiling the oceans. We're trying to sublimate the oceans. This is crazy nonsense. There's no possible way any of this could possibly work. But I have the chance. If I'm not going to do it, who's going to do it? So we have the chance to get this started here and really own up to it. And along with work in postpartum depression and perimenopause and the other work that's going on, we've also, a lot of the philanthropic stuff we did at Sokos Labs, I donated all of it to the Human Trust. So the tools for early childhood education that we built years ago, called Muse, all of that's going to be there. The systems I've worked on for diabetes for my son, while we can't share medical advice with people, all of those tools are going to be available inside the Human Trust. Again, with the spirit that AI should act in your self-interest, including some hard decisions about what really is in your self-interest. I get it. You don't want to read a boring email today, but sometimes that isn't the thing email should be helping you with. It should help you instead engage with the stuff you don't feel like doing every so often.
It's the broccoli brownie thing you've talked about before.
Well, I mean, that is the hard reality of my work is again and again and again, I invent broccoli. Everybody, when they read the nutritional data on broccoli, they love it. Oh my goodness, I definitely want broccoli. My kids want this broccoli. My company wants to buy your broccoli. And then you actually show up with some actual broccoli and they take a bite. And suddenly the look on their face says, you know what? I get brownies. I've got a supply chain for brownies. My kids like brownies. And the truth is, a lot of my work as an entrepreneur is how do I make my broccolis look and taste a little bit more like brownies without losing all of their nutritional value? Where do I find the tension such that I am solving a problem people are asking me to solve, but I'm also still solving a problem they need me to solve? And if it sounds arrogant to say that somehow I know what they need, well, one, I don't. I wish I was that smart, but I'm not. But also, two, sometimes you need to just make contact with the fact that, yeah, I make bad decisions. I eat things I shouldn't eat. My wife's diet is so much better than mine. And it really would be a good thing if every now and then I opened the fridge and the chocolate cake I had hidden away in the back just was in a little lockbox. And my little personal AI was saying, trust me, when you're your best self, you wouldn't have opened this box. So it'll open up again later, just not right now. Have some carrots instead. And sometimes you just need to deal with the tension that, it is absurd to think that I know the right thing for virtually myself to do, much less anyone else, with the reality that, we've looked really hard across hundreds of millions of people of what produces positive life outcomes. And to not be willing to state honestly to someone what might make their life better, I think it's a lack of courage to at least be honest with people about this issue. And at least be honest that it's a tension. It's a kind of a trolley problem unto itself, that you have to deal with this tension between what you believe is right and the fact that you don't get to decide for other people. And they're both true at the same time. And it's better to live in that tension than to give up and just pick one or the other.
On that note, one last question, and I ask every guest, because I feel that every human right now does have sort of an obligation to ensure or at least a role, whether it's an obligation or not, right? That's putting a judgment on it, but everyone has a role in shaping AI. And we do have choices, as you've been talking about before us right now. AI can benefit us immensely, or it can degrade the human experience, depending on what it is that we do now. How can people, what in your view is the best thing, the most important thing that people can do to what we say, be the prompt to ensure the best possible future with AI and possibly even exceeding our wildest dreams about what that human experience can be?
One reality is if you're making choices consistently in the direction of what makes me comfortable instead of what makes me uncomfortable, they may not be great choices. Not if they're all in that same direction. I know it sounds exhausting, but as I just said, living in tension, it's allostasis. It's the core reality of all biological systems in the world. We should embrace uncertainty. We should embrace tension, not to the level that it's chronic stress, not to the level that you're harming yourself, but clearly more so than we do when we're just allowed to make choices throughout our day. Lean in a little bit more. Think hard about, what would I do that means so much to me that I would do it even if it hurt a little bit. And not a lot, but a little bit. And begin to move in that direction. I think that there's something there. And when we think specifically about AI, and let's be honest, AI is complicated. It is a technology that changes on a weekly basis. You use this term AI, and you're right. The concept itself comes from 100 years ago. The first AIs come from, nearly 80 years ago. It's kind of astonishing to think the work, conceptual work in the 50s and then actual embodied work in the early 60s, Newell and Simon and others. But that stuff has nothing in common with what we call AI today. So this thing that changes deeply and fundamentally over time. So if all it really embodies is the ability of some artificial system to make a human expert level judgment increasingly cheaper, faster, and in many cases better than we can, if that's AI, then really don't think this is an endless resource. It's a finite one. It's a lot like every other resource in our world. What should it be working on? Would you be willing to trade an email making your life slightly easier right now, an AI making it easier right now, for an AI that saves your life later? For an AI that transforms the future of your children? If we could make thoughts about efficiency, not about what's most efficient literally here in the moment, but looking across the entire scope of our lives and our descendants' lives, their efficiency becomes a different creature. And we could really begin to think, what are the choices I make now using this amazing paintbrush that is not paintbrush, paint a picture for me, of which I don't even know, make it a frog, as opposed to paintbrush, help me write the future of my life story. Help me paint a picture of what the world could be if, and because you're not really a paintbrush, you're AI, tell me the steps I could go through to get there. That is truly something AI can play a role in our life doing that is amazing. That is some of that promise that's always been there. And it disturbs me that we end up with the paintbrush that paints the pictures itself instead of the one that gives us a vision into our own futures and allows us to change our own pictures. But that's why I think ultimately the story of AI is the story of us. It's the choices we make in building it. It's the choices we make in building products around it. And ultimately, in the end, the choices we make in what we want our life to be. And it always has been, long before AI ever came along. It's really putting a huge pressure. It's turning this capability up to affect our lives to an enormous level. we need to take that seriously. And I guess I would say, because it is incredibly complicated, because I'm also telling you, you shouldn't just trust me about this or trust Zuckerberg or anyone else. We need to be voting for policymakers and politicians that have the courage to do what's right. And I get we believe we're always doing that. But I will tell you, the single most courageous thing I have ever seen a politician do, and this isn't going to be a modern reference, and nor is it going to be a reference to a politician I voted for when given the choice. Nonetheless, it was when John McCain, when confronted by an audience member that said Barack Obama is a Muslim and a bad man, he said he's not. He is an honorable man and a great American. And that was the closest I ever came. That alone, if that John McCain had truly run for president, and not the man that was kind of pandering to the emerging Republican Party of that day, that might have been a harder vote for me. Because there's one thing to vote in favor of the policies you want in the moment. It's another thing to vote for the substance of a person's character. And maybe that's what I'm calling for. Vote for the substance of what your own character could be. Be willing to make a sacrifice and really build that sense of purpose. I guess the one thing I can say about it is you'll live a longer, happier, wealthier life.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much, Vivienne, Dr. Ming, for bringing not so mad, but definitely not sufficiently heard and considered perspectives on what's at stake for the relationship between intelligent machines and wise, purposeful humans. I really appreciate our time today.
It was so much fun. Thanks for letting me ramble.
Oh, no, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on the Humanity Code Conversations. Remember, our future with AI is being written now and by us. Let's ensure it's a story that honors and elevates our shared humanity.